Welcome back to Her Daring, brought to you by Bagnet Company. I'm your host, Kelley Daring. On today's episode, I am chatting with my guest, Rebecca Jones, about the concept of the village. Rebecca has worked as my creative director at Bagnet Company for a little over 2 years, and she is also the editor and publisher of this podcast. Rebecca and I have noticed that on so many of my Regretful Parents videos on TikTok, women often comment on the lack of the much-needed village that's necessary for the development, well-being, and support of mothers and their children. The saying goes, it takes a village to raise a child, but the village is like some mythical fairy tale that few women in the modern U.S. have ever experienced. In our conversation today, I want to expand this topic to not only examine the village, or lack thereof, for mothers, but also for women in general. I think non-mothers need support too and would benefit from the proverbial village. And I think that in general, we are all so isolated that none of us have the support that we truly need that would enable us to really flourish. So, Rebecca, welcome. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Kelley.
You're welcome. And I do want to note that the format of this episode is going to be a little bit different than what I've done before. Rebecca and I are just going to chat. There's no real structure to this episode, so we just want to have a chat. She has 2 kids, and so this is a topic that really interests her. So it's something we just kind of wanted to have a conversation about and invite you in to listen. Tell us about your kids, Rebecca.
I am a mom of 2. I have a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old. They're both boys. This topic is especially prevalent in my life because it was one of the things that I noticed that I didn't have, the village, the group of people around me as they were growing up. So this is something that as I've listened to the Regretful Parents, the stories that Kelley has put on her TikToks, but also through editing a lot of the episodes for this podcast, I've noticed this kind of common theme. And one of the things that really stood out to me, especially, and if you've been following the podcast and have listened to all the episodes, you'll have heard from Orna Danath about her study on the women who do not want to be mothers, and that there are no conditions that are really going to make it perfect for some people to have to want to be mothers. And so when I was editing that particular episode, I was like, Kelley, we gotta talk about this, because I think that this is something that we need to kind of put out there, get people's feedback on, and really try to dissect a little bit more, because it's pretty close to me.
It was Rebecca's idea to do this episode, and I love that you brought it up. And I think we are going to talk a little bit about what it means, what a village actually means, what it actually looks like, and where that comes from, as well as a little bit of the history behind where our village has gone, because we used to have a village, 100 years, well, probably a little over 200 years ago, is when the Industrial Revolution started and things started to change, and the village just disintegrated over a generation or 2. So I kind of want to look at that history too, look at the way it used to be, and then I'd love to kind of build a utopian version of the village in modern day, where we are looking at it through a lens of technology, because we live in the age of technology now. We can't put the genie back in the bottle, and so if we're going to think about a village, let's have it all. Let's look at the modern day village that we could possibly have, but through a lens of our actual lives right now, which revolve around technology. So that's kind of what I want to do in this episode.
Love it. I love that. I've fantasized about that so many times.
You're the perfect guest then for this. Okay, so what does it mean? What is the proverbial village? What does that mean to you?
So to me, that's it's all the people that surround you. If you're a mom or if you're just a person, they're just the people that surround you, that can support you, that can support your family. And it's everybody. It's it's your immediate family. It's your spouse or your partner. It might be your parents or, your children's grandparents. It might be your great grandparents. It might be your brothers and your sisters. But it also expands beyond your immediate family. At least to me, it's the people that are helping teach your kids. So your teachers, they're even beyond people who are teaching, it's people who pick up your garbage, they're part of your village, right? Your mailman is part of your village. to me, it's those people that really surround you and support you in your life as you're moving through it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it could be, depending on where you live, it could be teachers and doctors and librarians and shop owners and like older siblings, extended family. It can literally be everyone in your community
Yeah.
if you live in the right community.
Yeah.
Well, I did some research, and according to NPR, the proverb "it takes a village to raise a child" comes from African cultures, which makes sense because that is truly the village. When you look at how they raise their children, the whole village, the whole tribe, is responsible for all the children, all the people in that village, and so it makes sense that that's where that proverb comes from.
Yeah, and I've that's kind of the lens that I was like looking at my village through, was like, how does this compare to villages like that? And I know that we live in such a very different kind of environment that the comparison is pretty hard to come by, but it's more or less like just the support that those tribes in Africa, they give each other. And I think that's what's missing now in the support around families in the modern, in Western cultures like ours.
Yeah, and in those tribes and those cultures, they recognize and acknowledge the fact that it takes that many people to provide a safe, healthy environment for children to grow and to flourish. Whereas I think just in the last 200 years, we have become so isolated and I want to say independent, but I think there's a better word. We're just so single-minded in we don't want anybody else raising our children. We only want to teach our children our values and our culture and our politics, the things that are important to us. But I think we're doing ourselves a disservice and we're doing our children a disservice by doing that.
I agree. It's one of those things where as a parent, or as anybody who's trying to raise a good human being, you're trying to give them as much perspective as possible. And so when you're limited access to other people, it's very hard to do that. You have to do that very intentionally.
Yep, exactly. Mm-hmm. Let's look at the history of the village. Let's look at the village back then. And by back then, I mean prior to the Industrial Revolution. Like, if you think about that, what do you envision? Either in like an African tribe or culture, or even in like a European. A lot of times I picture like a European type village where the whole village is participating in raising children. So what do you see when you think about the village back then?
Like, I imagine it's very idyllic in my head. It's very romanticized, but I feel like it's families that eat together. They're families that do chores together, or they're families that make, they cultivate their own foods together, or they're making breads together, or they're feeding the other people in their community. They're all working together. So if I were to like distill that down to a family, I would say it'd be a multi-generational family that lives together in one single home, or in multiple homes that are very close to each other, within walking distance, ideally, because the kids can then run up and down the street. They can go to grandma's house, or they can go to their aunt whoever's house, and they can go play with their cousins on a whim. There's no scheduling. There's no can we come over? It's, oh, the kids are here again kind of thing. And it's a lot like you're just popping over. You're just together. I feel like in that back then, there was more freedom to be together and no constraints in terms of scheduling. So dinners were together, breakfasts were together. It was, a lot of communities were just spending time together, either in their town squares. Like, I can imagine, let's say in this family, in this European little town that I've created in my head, grandma and grandpa, they have their coffee shop that they go to every day, and they have like 6 or 7 friends that go there, and they're all playing cards together, right? Like, and they are just talking. They're just enjoying each other's company. They're arguing about politics. They're getting heated, but they're still staying friends, right? And then they're coming home and they're having dinner with their family, and the grandkids are running around, and maybe there's a chicken or two. I don't know. It's very stereotypical in my head.
I like the chicken. It's a good addition.
Yeah, gotta have that. But yeah, I imagine that it's a lot less structured, right? Like it's a lot more freedom and a lot less structured in that kind of back then.
Yeah. I picture everything you just said, I picture as well. And I picture kind of a small community where you're walking a lot or riding your bike and you know your neighbors and you talk to your
Hmm.
neighbors and you know the people that own the shops. And there are no big mega corporations or stores, of course.
Yeah.
There's little shops. There's your butcher, the little shop where you buy your, I don't know, flour, and the people in your church, and the teacher at the school, and the doctors, and the clergy people. You have this community and you have this village and you all know each other and you're all there to support each other.
Hmm.
And I do see that extended family as well. You might not live together all under one roof, but you are very close to each other, and there are drop-ins, constant drop-ins, and it's not structured, and you don't need to make an appointment to
Yeah.
see your family or your friends. You just drop by.
You just drop by. I think that is key, is the dropping by.
It
It's
is.
the I just a side note that I have not experienced a drop by in so long, and I kind of crave it, right? Kind of crave it.
Yes, absolutely. My friend Heather, sidebar, my friend Heather, she recently moved to Sacramento, probably about a year ago, and she bought a house, and she has said multiple times, I just want there to be a day, like every week, where people can feel free to drop in anytime they want. And there's no pressure on me. I'm not really entertaining. I'm not going to clean the house, and nobody's going to judge me because, it's a little messy. And I'm not providing like drinks or food, but it's a whole day where people just know they can drop in, say hi, hang out for 20 minutes, hang out for 2 hours, talk to the neighbors. And it's just a come and go as you please type situation. And I think that's such a lovely idea and so foreign because no one does that.
Right? I know. It's so strange, I think, that we don't do that. I have tried. I have tried with friends to do that. Like if I'm in the area, I'll call and be like, "Hey, I'm right around the corner. I'm going to stop by." And they'll be like, maybe now it's not a great time." But I feel like we need to take the pressure off of ourselves, especially with really good friends and people who surround us and support us. Anyway, big sidebar there.
But it is, yeah, a little sidebar. And I think it's easier with really close friends, but
Hmm.
how many really close friends do you have? I
Right.
have maybe two, like extremely
Hmm.
close. And then the rest are, some different level of acquaintance to
Yeah.
good friend. But,
Yeah.
but yeah, even acquaintances should feel free to
Yeah.
drop by, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely.
When we think about those villages, I want to think about who benefited because it wasn't just mothers. Everyone in those villages and in those African cultures, they are all benefiting. It's not
Hmm.
just the mother. So we talk about there being a lack of the village for the mother, but in reality, we're all hurt by this lack of village.
Right.
Everyone benefits from that village. Children, women who are not mothers, boys, men, it doesn't matter.
Hmm.
We aren't meant to be isolated.
No, I agree. I think every single person, so it's young, it's the old, especially the elderly. I think that they benefit a lot from the energy that they get from the young kids in those villages. They benefit from having multiple adults that help take care of them as well. And I think that they might, live the ends of their days a little bit happier because they have more interaction. They have more ways to interact with the people that surround them and support them and have supported them for a very long time. I think the men in those villages also benefit. So I know that we're like very women centric, but I think that the men, they get, that camaraderie, they get that ability to really like hone their skills and be able to, see what else is going on in their world beyond just who they are. And then the boys also benefit, the young boys really benefit from the skills that they can learn from the adult men and the adult women in their villages. And then, coming back to the moms and the women, I think that it's just the support. It's the feeling of being supported. It's the feeling of having more hands in the pot.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. What do you think the village, how would you describe the village now or lack thereof? What does modern day look like?
Ugh, modern day villages, they just don't exist. They just don't. I mean, maybe for some people they do, and I don't want to say that they don't exist at all, because I'm sure that there are different like parts and pieces of our civilization that still have that, right? And of even of our Western civilization, even in the United States, I'm sure that they exist somewhere,
Yeah.
but I think for the majority of people, we are just so isolated. And you were saying, prior to the Industrial Revolution, it looked very different. But then after, where we are now, we're all trying to just make enough money to get to to survive, right?
Yeah.
And so our village doesn't exist anymore because we're just too busy making money to be able to survive. And so we
Got it.
can't nurture those relationships. We don't have time to nurture those relationships. And that's why everything right now is so scheduled, right? So for moms, and a lot of this came up because a lot of the comments that you get on your TikTok is like, well, she didn't have enough support, or there wasn't enough people around her that could help her, or maybe if she had more help, she wouldn't have regretted being a mom, right? And I think that to some extent, women don't want to be moms. They don't have to be moms. That's okay. But I do feel like the moms that are regretful, or the moms that have really struggled, they're the ones that just don't have enough support at all, like zero support. And I feel like if we had more opportunities to build our villages, that maybe those moms wouldn't feel quite so alone, and they wouldn't feel quite so regretful.
Yeah, I agree. I think the village is gone. I think
Mm-hmm.
it does exist for some people in some places, but for the majority of people, there is no village. And I
Yeah.
think the norm now, I know the norm now, is the nuclear family living under one roof in a suburban area that is not walkable or bike friendly. So we all have to rely on our cars. And that means that the necessary physical proximity to our villagers is completely removed. Most people live in a single family home with an attached garage, which means they can go in and leave without ever having to wave to a neighbor or even get to know their neighbor, even know their neighbor's name.
Names. Yeah, I think that's the worst part of it. When I think back to like how villages could have been in the past, it's like all those people were interacting on a regular basis all the time. Whereas now, our neighborhoods, some of them don't even have sidewalks.
No,
Like, it's not cool.
no. And I mean, we definitely don't have multiple generations living under one roof. We might have locally owned shops, but they're few and far between. And most people are going to the big box stores because
Yeah.
that's where the prices are cheaper.
Yeah.
And so you don't get to know your local business owners, the people who live around you. And then rather than caring for our aging parents in our homes, we place them in senior communities and nursing homes.
Yeah.
So again, we lose that benefit of multiple generations being under one roof.
We also lose the storytelling, right? Like
Yes.
we also lose like, because in like African tribes and all of those kinds of communities, the elderly are always the ones that are telling the stories, and they're always the ones that are repeating the history and teaching us a lot about our past. Whereas now we're putting our elderly in those senior assisted living facilities, and maybe visiting a couple times a month, and it's kind
Yeah,
of sad because there's such a wealth of knowledge that they hold.
absolutely. For those who do have a village right now, I wonder what that consists of. And my vision of that is maybe like they have grandparents that are pretty involved, and those grandparents live within 30-minute drive or so. They may have a reliable and trusted friend or two, or maybe a large group of friends. They probably have like a trusted babysitter, an involved spouse, and maybe like an aunt or like a sibling who's an aunt or uncle to their children. They probably also have childcare that they can afford, which I think is a huge part of the village. But aside from that, do you think modern people who truly do have a modern day village, do you think there's anything that I missed there? Like, what else?
I think in terms of modern villages, you kind of hit the nail on the head there.
I do think the history of the disintegration of the village is super interesting. And I did spend a little time looking into it, even though I had a pretty good idea. I thought we could talk through that a little bit. And I especially think it's interesting how it came to be that women's unpaid labor in the home came to be so undervalued.
It's wild.
It is wild.
I was reading through your notes, and like I I was enlightened because I didn't quite realize.
Yeah, okay, cool. So the Industrial Revolution occurred from 1760 to 1840. So that was about 200 years ago, and it completely changed the way that we live and how families operate. And it is important to recognize that this was only 200 years ago. That's really recent. And so prior to that, family life was pretty much unchanged for all of history. So it's only in the last 200 years that we've been living in this weird way that we've never really been meant to live.
Mm-hmm.
The nuclear family. So the Industrial Revolution sent fathers to work in factories, which when they had previously worked at home or close to home, and often with their wives and their children. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, men learned a skill or a trade, and they taught their children, or at least their sons, that trade. They made money by selling goods they or their wives produced, or they made money by providing services. And if they lived in a rural area, they likely had farmland and animals that provided food for their family. And the entire family, including mom and kids, worked that farmland and kept the home. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, men were considered the head of the households, but the role of women as caretakers and producers of goods, food, clothing was equally important. So there was a division of labor based on gender, but they were equal. Both were valued. And then in more urban areas, families might have a small shop or a business where they sold goods or provided services to make money. And we already discussed what the village looked like at that time. So I'm not going to go into that again, but it's this whole community of people that made up the village. And then the Industrial Revolution occurred. And when fathers began working in factories for long hours every day, and families started moving to larger cities to accommodate that work, this meant that mothers were left at home without their husbands. And that's where they became solely responsible for taking care of the home and raising children. And the family no longer produced goods or services, which meant that the father became the sole breadwinner / moneymaker. This increased the popularity of a mother-centered approach to child rearing. And one of the biggest cultural and economic impacts of the Industrial Revolution was this. Although much of the work done by women before the revolution, like the cooking, cleaning, sewing, caring for children, maintaining family social relationships, managing the household, although that work was completely unchanged by the Industrial Revolution, she said she did the same work she did after that she did before. The culture and economic value of housework changed drastically and lost almost all of its former value. And it just pisses me off to no end. And I hope every woman who listens to this. So men's ability to earn money through their paid labor quickly came to trump women's unpaid work, which ultimately came to not even be seen as labor. It's really important that we think about that when we look at this disintegration of the village, because our work is no longer valued. It's unappreciated. We don't get the support because we don't make money. And at doing what we do in the home and for our children, we don't make money. Therefore, to society, we bring no value. Mm-hmm. And I think obviously if anything's going to change, we have to start with that.
Yeah, it's really wild. It was like such a history lesson in that just little bit of information that really kind of opened your eyes to how everything has changed in such a short period of time. So you said 200 years, right? That's 2 generations. It's just 2 generations of our lifetime. Like, that's it. Like, 2 generations has changed the entire landscape of how women's labor is viewed and valued.
Exactly. And I want to quote something from, there's a website called teachinghistory.org. And it's really important in understanding how women's labor was completely undermined, yet it was wholly instrumental in the success of the Industrial Revolution. This is the quote. "This cultural devaluation of women's household work masked its continuing, deep-seated economic importance. Few working-class male wage earners earned enough cash to meet all household economic needs and relied on women's unpaid labor to make up the difference. In other words, working-class women's unpaid work was integral to the basic process of industrialization, providing a hidden subsidy to manufacturers that allowed them to pay less than subsistence wages to their employees. In this sense, both of the major types of work that women performed, paid and unpaid, were economically significant components of the Industrial Revolution in the United States. And it's important to understand that the exploitation and devaluation of women's labor continues to this day and is partially responsible for our lack of village. Call Her Daring is sponsored by Bagnet Company. I founded Bagnet Company in 2015, and since then I've made it my mission to create useful accessories that not only make your life easier, they add a little sparkle to your everyday. The best pleasures in life are the little things that you love using because they bring a smile to your face and serve a purpose. That's why Bagnet Company is a no-brainer for women who know they deserve to have it all. Easier, better, more beautiful. It's not a tagline, it's a life mantra. So let's look at the effect of the disappearance of the village. Who's being affected and what are women saying about it? Tell me your personal experience. What is the effect of the I think you have a story actually about this, about kind of like when you realized the village was gone. So why don't you tell me about that?
So there was a turning point, and it was during COVID. You know, I think that when we were all completely isolated during that time, there was a clear understanding that there was limited support for at least for women, or at least for myself. There was one day that I made a really big decision that really solidified the fact that I did not have a village anymore, and that was the day that I chose to homeschool my kids. So it was a tough decision that we made, my husband and I made. For any woman that makes that decision about taking their children out of the public school system and deciding to homeschool them, even for a short period of time, like I really viewed the teachers that they had as part of my village. Like all of the individual teachers, they all had individual perspectives on their life. They were providing a huge value to my kids in that they knew how to solve problems differently than I did, and they were surrounded by all these different teachers, all different walks of life, all different life experiences that they were all contributing to their growth. But there came a point in time where I didn't feel like they were safe in the school that they were in, and I wanted to take them home, and I wanted to make sure that I could keep them safe. And that when I made that decision, I grieved the loss of my village pretty hard, because it just made things very hard for us, right? We eventually figured it out, and for anybody who is contemplating homeschooling, like do not go lightly into that decision. Really do your research on it and figure out what you want to do. But it took us a while to figure that out, and we struggled a lot. But it was that moment that I was like, okay, they're no longer going to go back to school. They're staying home with me. Now I am like the only perspective that they will have. And it became a huge undertaking for me to find perspectives for them, so that they were always being exposed to other things besides myself and my husband. COVID made it very difficult because, nobody wanted to interact with anybody during that time, but we made it work, right? We made it work for that couple of months that we were very isolated. And then we live in Florida, so whoever's listening knows how Florida kind of handled everything. And so we were able to get them out in public a little bit earlier than I think some other states. So that was the point at which I actually realized that I no longer had the extended village that I had. And, beyond that, we live in Florida by ourselves. We don't have family members that live nearby. My mother, their grandmother, lived 1,300 miles away, as does my sister and all their cousins. And so there wasn't a huge support system for us. So we were alone a lot. And that was very hard. But I would say that it did give us an opportunity to figure out how to problem solve. And it gave my kids a lot of opportunities to like figure out what they wanted to do and what they wanted to learn about. So there was a lot of upsides to it. But yeah, village gone. the minute that I was like, nope, you're going to stay home with me now. So that was really hard.
Yeah. And so many women comment and report feelings of isolation and loneliness and lack of support. And it sounds like you experienced that. I mean, it was COVID also,
Yeah.
but now you're still kind of in the same boat, right? Because you still homeschool your kids. There's
Mm-hmm.
still this lack of a village. Do you feel feelings of loneliness and isolation?
I think that that in those first couple of months, it was very exacerbated. It was way inflated, that feeling of isolation. And I had always kind of felt that as a mom because I didn't have close proximity to a lot of family members to help with like things like if I needed to run to the store, I didn't have somebody to watch the kids. I couldn't just go drop them off at my sister's, right? Or they didn't live on the same street that they could like run up to grandma's house, right? And that's kind of the village that I missed that I didn't have. But now we figured it out. Like they have my one son has gone back to school, so he has got his other teachers, which are absolutely amazing. And so I think that everything happens for a reason. My younger son will be going to that same school and will have the same teachers, and so he'll be able to really expand his horizons. And then we were able to find tutors. We were able to find external people that would help with certain subjects for him. And so not having those teachers provide that in the public school setting, we had to kind of emulate that or replicate that on our own. So it was a lot of work for me to figure it out. But we managed. And I would say that they're doing exceptionally well because they had very close, like one-on-one instruction in different things. And then they're both very well-rounded for kids that have been home that were home for almost a year with me. They're very well-rounded boys. They're very good boys. So
Yes, they are.
but we had to really work at it. So like we put them into Boy Scouts or Cub Scouts at the time, and that really helped to create a community of people that were surrounding us. And I would say that like that's probably, if I look back on it, that's probably the closest to a real village that we ever had, was putting them in a program like that, because we were a part of that. We were leaders. I helped run like membership on that. And so I got to know all the parents, and when we would go on camping trips, like all the parents were responsible for all the kids. So, and then like, and it was never a question like, yes, you can go discipline my kid, I'm not going to yell at you. Like if he's doing something wrong, do that, like go keep him safe, and I will do the same for your children. It was kind of unspoken. And so we did seek out those kinds of programs for kids. And so so now it's better. Before, I was incredibly isolated, and I very much empathize with all of the women that feel that way, because it was very much awful.
And mothers also talk about how exhausting it is, and it's never ending, and it's thankless, and they get no breaks, and they feel like they have to be super moms who do it all. They work 40 plus hours a week like you do to earn half of the family's income. Then they have to be a loving and patient mother to their children. They have to be a loving and devoted wife to their husband, who often refuses to participate equally in raising those children and taking care of the home. And then on top of all that, women talk about how they're not allowed to complain or voice their discontent for fear of being labeled a bad mom or ungrateful. You take this lack of village, but then you even make it worse by making it impossible for women to even talk about their struggles and their pain, which is one of the main reasons why I started this podcast and my TikTok series, is because women should be able to talk about their discomfort, their pain. Motherhood is freaking hard, and we are making it harder by making it impossible to talk about those hardships.
Yeah, it is absolutely hard. And I love that you had this platform, because I feel like women really need to know like what they're getting themselves into.
Yeah, absolutely. And another issue, of course, is money, which you talked about. We're all just trying to survive. We're all just trying to make enough money. And in order nowadays, without the village, if you need support, you need to be able to buy that support. You need to be able to pay for childcare, daycare, tutoring, summer camps, sports. anything that's a village, part of a village now, you have to buy. And
Mhm.
I think that's something we want to break down in like our utopian village is is that we shouldn't have to pay for this village. We
Right.
should be on like this bartering system where we all benefit, we all give, and we all benefit.
Yeah.
So I can't wait to talk about that. Young women are witnessing the toll that motherhood is taking on women, and they are opting out of motherhood even when they might want children. I'm not even just talking about women who don't want children. There are women who want children who see how freaking hard it is in today's age to have children, and they're saying, no, I'm not going to do that, even though I want kids, which is really sad.
And I feel like if there was that, that village that surrounded their moms, that they might feel very differently about that. Because if they
Exactly.
saw their mom being supported by their aunts or their grandmothers or, friends or whoever was around them, I feel like those women who are on the edge or choose not to have children because they see how awful and hard it is, if those women could see their mothers being supported or other mothers around them being supported, they might feel very differently about it.
Agreed. So let's go through the exercise of building our modern day utopian version of the village. Let's talk about
This
what
is
that looks like.
this is a exercise that my sister and I have fantasized about many a
Cool.
times,
All right, I
especially
can't wait
in
to think
like
about it.
the moments where we are very fed up with all of the people that are around us. We're like, what would it be like if it was just us?
Yep. I think many women fantasize about
Yeah.
that.
Hmm.
I was thinking about this on my own, and envisioning this modern day utopia, it requires a lot of imagination and
Hmm.
I think a willingness to consider a way of life that is pretty far removed from current cultural norms, which I realized as I was envisioning this utopia. And I think when you're envisioning this uber supportive community where services and goods are being traded rather than purchased, and non-family community members are actively helping to raise all children, it's pretty hard to not veer into like this hippy dippy artsy fartsy community type situation that feels really off from reality, and in some ways it's not really appealing. So the way that and I talked about this earlier, the way that I kept my imagination from just like careening off this cliff was to think about all of these ideas through a lens of technology. So things like smartphones and apps and web-based organization. So if you think about all it sounds hippy dippy because it sounds like a commune. But if you think about it through a lens of technology, I think that helps it seem more modern and less hippy dippy. So that's just my sidebar on this before we start talking about
I
the
like that.
utopia.
There's value to the idea of bringing in the technology aspect of it because it is where we live now. It's not going anywhere.
Exactly. And yeah, we're never going back. So, okay, so let's talk about like community living spaces because we'd have to change how, like, where we live, what our communities look like. So, I think we would have to design housing that encourages like close proximity and interaction among families. And so, but without it feeling like a commune. So, how do you see do you have like a vision of this? For me, it's kind of like a European city. Like we're close and we're walkable and we're bikeable, but we're not like on this like on
Yeah.
acreage of farmland, like
Yeah.
working the land.
I think one important aspect of that type of a community is the mix of houses with shops. So like
Yes,
right
mixed
now,
use.
if you're looking at the neighborhoods now, they're all like single family homes. But like when we start thinking about utopia, it's like you want to have everything accessible or at least close in proximity to you. So if we're mixing residential properties and like small shops, then maybe families can own the shop that's right next door. They don't have to have a car to like go to work or to like make the money that they need to pay for the things that they actually have to pay for. And then it gives them an opportunity to actually like go out of their house and walk a little bit, right? In terms of like what the layout would be, I don't know. This is tricky because like I don't, in my head, I imagine it like it's built around like a center, like almost
Mm-hmm.
like a town center, and then everything
Yeah,
kind of
like a
spirals
piazza.
out from there. Yeah. So that way, like, everything is like, there's a way to get to the middle of everything, and that's where everybody kind of is, and everybody else like lives and works around the center.
Yeah, and I envision kind of like a mixed use type situation where there's retail or services on the first floor, and then people who own those businesses live on top. So you've got these 2-story buildings. Retail is all walkable, and then everybody lives on top. Not everyone, but those people who own those stores. And yeah, like a town square is perfect. You want this. We're going to talk about third spaces, I think, but you want this third space or multiple third spaces where you can go and be with other people, but you don't have to be paying for something. You don't have to be buying a coffee or buying a book or, which is all we have now. Our third spaces are gone. So why don't we talk about the third spaces now? I think that's a good time.
Yeah, I actually stumbled upon this a while ago because I had read an article about the disappearance of third spaces in the world these days. And a third space, that's literally what it's called. Third space. You have your home, you have your work, and then you have this third space. And the term was coined by a sociologist, and it really just talks about that, like exactly what you said. It's a place where you don't have to schedule, where you don't have to ask. It's like, a park, or it's a town square, or it's even things like the salon. You remember, I don't know, like in movies, there was always those shots of like the women who went to the salons, and like they were just hanging around. They just hung out there and they just talked, and some of them got their hair done, some of them didn't. Like they just came to hang out. Barbershops, same thing, right? The men would go, they'd smoke their cigars, one of them would get their hair done, and they'd just talk, right?
Yep.
So it's kind of like even we have those pre-built like town square, that's a third space. But like those are coffee shops, those are third spaces. Barbershops, those are third spaces. It's basically just a place where you can kind of be and not have to schedule and not have to ask permission. You just kind of go and be with everybody there.
Exactly. And buying something is optional.
Yep. And I saw this a lot. So I traveled to Greece a couple of years ago, and I saw third spaces in action, which I thought was very cool. On the island of Syros, there is a huge town square. And because of the climate there, it's virtually empty throughout the day. But once the sun goes down, that's where all the families go. They literally, like, they'll eat there, they'll bring dinner there. They'll all the adults will have they'll get a drink maybe at a bar, and they'll come and they'll sit in the town square. The kids will run and play. They will chase the birds. There is no like schedule. There's no phone call of like, hey, what are you doing? Can we come over right now? It's literally, they just go there at the end of the day. That's what they do. And so I thought that was really interesting because the houses there are really small because they spend more time in these third spaces. They don't need as much room in their own houses. So definitely would have a third space in this utopia.
Yep. I've noticed the same thing in my travels. I've traveled quite a bit, and I've spent a lot of time in European cities. And in countries like Italy and France, Spain, there are these, it's usually like a piazza. It's a town square. There's usually a beautiful fountain or something, not always, probably a church. But people are just hanging out after dinner, before dinner. They're just hanging out. They're talking. They're standing around. The kids are playing with a ball. Like they're not on their phones. And people just talk.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's so foreign.
I know. It's wild. And I think that's what we've lost in our current way of life, is that just spontaneous, like just go hang out, just talk.
Yep. And in addition to those third spaces, I think we also need common areas where we can do like structured activities like cooking, laundry, childcare, exercise, bocce ball, pickleball, yoga. I think neighborhoods need to be tree lined so that they're cool, so that you can walk year round. So I think these communities, this utopia, has to be built for people being outside their homes quite a bit, because that's where you're really interacting with the community.
I imagine I like the idea of tree line. I mean, I've seen so many developments going up and they're just tearing down all the trees, and it's like, where do you think we get cool from? And how, like, without sidewalks and without trees, it just is unbearable to be outside right now, especially during the summertime. But like, oh man.
I don't have the actual figures, but there's been studies done of affluent neighborhoods that have a lot of trees compared to neighborhoods that are less affluent, where there are no trees, and the heat, just the heat
Mm-hmm.
in those neighborhoods is off by multiple degrees.
Yeah.
And this is important because those people who are living in that less affluent neighborhood, their cooling bills are higher.
Yeah. Everything's more expensive. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So also in this utopia, I think there has to be support networks for new mothers and women alike. So like mother circles or parent pods, or even just, and this could be, so let's think about technology. This could be in person, but it could also be through apps and through web-based organization. And I think it's an integral part of any utopian village is support systems and support networks. So I think that's definitely a part. I think women have to be willing to consider breaking with societal norms and cultural expectations of cohabitating with romantic male partners. And I think this is, when you talk to your sister, I think this might be a part of it, is like, you're like, let's just ship all the men to an island. Yeah.
It's pretty much exactly what we say.
When they really piss you off.
Yeah, we'll just put them all over there and we'll just call them when we need them.
Yeah. And it's very far off from where we are now, I understand, so it's hard to imagine. But in this utopian version of the village, women can and should rely on each other more than they rely on men. And I know some people aren't going to like that, and that's going to be uncomfortable for some people. But a community of women supporting each other, if I think about living amongst women who I love, who I trust, who I would trust with my children if I had them, who they would trust me with their children, it's such, I get a good feeling from that. It seems very warm and supportive. These communities could be very women-centered. Yes.
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm very fortunate to have a very wonderful supportive partner. Like we've been together for over 20 years. He's my best friend. He makes my heart smile when he comes into a room. I am hoping that I am raising two boys to be like that. Yeah. But I know that my heart gets full, my soul fills up when I'm around the women in my life. And so I think that in this utopia, I do think that maybe the men, like, they have their own things and they have their own spaces, and then the women can be together and we can fill our cups together.
Yes.
And I think that there's value in maybe a little bit of a separation.
One of us mentioned having to pay for everything. And so in this utopian village, I think that goes away. I think trading and bartering for services would be the way to do it. You don't have to earn 6 figures because you're not paying for childcare, you're not paying for tutoring, you're not paying for organized sports, because it's all just happening within the community through reciprocity. And I think people in this community would take turns babysitting and take turns doing school pickups or keeping the kids occupied during summer vacations. And I also envision women doing things like teaching a group of kids a skill like swimming or how to do laundry or how to make a simple dinner. Yeah. And that's cool because for that evening, that one woman's got these 30 kids that she's teaching this new skill, and those moms of those kids have a free evening. And then maybe the next night it's another mom's turn to teach a new skill. And in this way, your kids are learning, they're benefiting from all these different relationships and influences, and you're also getting time off. You're getting this time off that you desperately need. Yeah.
And I think that's really important, because a theme that I hear in the Regretful Mom series that you have is that, like, those moms have maybe lost themselves to motherhood, right? And so if we have this supportive community, if we have these women that are all supporting each other and like lightening the load a little bit, then maybe women wouldn't lose themselves to the role of mother, right? Maybe they would have more space to figure out what they like, to grow and evolve in an individual, and then also be a mom. So like there's a nice way to kind of wrap that together, in that the support also helps you evolve as an individual because you have time. You have that time.
Absolutely. Yeah. You have time to focus on yourself for a little
Yep.
bit.
Yep.
Yeah. What do you think about like community gardens and local food production, things like that? Maybe
All
even
of those.
making, yeah, I think so too.
All of those things. That's like, I mean, when we talk about our salaries, right? We have to make money because we have to buy food. If we knew how to, or if we had a community that we could produce our own food, then we wouldn't have to buy it, right? So like, there's that in the village of like, maybe your skill isn't gardening, but maybe your skill is like preparing the food. Maybe you're really good at cooking it, and so maybe you don't have to be in the gardens to help produce the food, but you are on the other end of it creating something delicious for everybody to eat. So like, it's that reciprocity that I think is really important in this utopia, where we see and value the strengths and the skills of all of the other people and individuals that are involved, and then play to those strengths. Like, what's your highest and best? Are you really good at cooking, or are you really good at, like, sewing this dress, right? Like, let's put you in the place where you feel most fulfilled, but then also give you freedom to explore other things, like, having your weekends off or your evenings off because your children are somewhere, learning a new skill, where you can go, oh, I've really liked, making dinners, and I've really liked learning how to cook and becoming this amazing chef, but also, like, I really want to learn how to work on a car engine. Like,
Right.
this really like makes my wheels turn. So like, giving space to new skills and learning new things from the people around you. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the flexibility of, yeah, you don't have to be good at everything. So you suck at cooking. Okay, cool. You don't have to cook, but you're great at making soap and candles. Okay,
right.
great. We need soap and candles. So
Yeah.
you do you, and it's great.
Yeah.
And we all benefit.
Exactly.
Educational programs, obviously, mental health resources, counseling services. I think that's all obviously part of any village for women and mothers.
I wonder how necessary they might be if those people are supported. I wonder how.
That's such a great point.
I wonder if they would even be that necessary, because when you shoot the shit with your girlfriends, like, you feel so much better after that, right? So like, if there was more opportunities to do that, and to kind of like get feedback, get external feedback, but also like unload how you feel about certain things, and maybe, and I'm just like hopeful about that, maybe you wouldn't necessarily need them.
Yeah, and with the removal of so many stressors, like having to make six figures and having to buy these groceries that just keep going up in cost, and you have no control over that, things like that. If you remove those stressors, then yeah, maybe there's way less need for mental health services and the like.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a great point. I didn't even think about that.
Mm-hmm.
What else? What else is in this utopia?
I think that one of the important things about this utopia is just that security, right? Knowing that you have a safe space where you have your people around you, you can trust the community. And I know, like, this is just a pipe dream, because there's always going to be those people in the world that are quite not so trustworthy, but in our utopia they are.
Right.
And security is really important. So I think that, in the terms of like technology, maybe there's some sort of, I don't know, system that we're all a part of, that we can all help keep everybody safe and secure in that whole realm. I don't know exactly what that is, but I think that there's something there. Maybe our listeners can help us like decipher what that might be in our group, because we do put these videos in our Facebook group, and would love to hear your thoughts and comments on this too.
Yes, that is a great point. Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to put this on social media. If you have other ideas for this utopia, we would love to hear them. Let's build like the perfect world. It sounds so fun and so comforting and so supportive.
I know. It would be great.
It would. It's interesting you brought up safety, though, and people we can't trust, because once we started being isolated in these suburban areas, even though the world has actually gotten safer, statistics show the world is safer, this country is safer, we have been led to believe that it is less and less safe, and that further serves to isolate us from each other. So frustrating.
It's very wild. And I think a lot of it has to do with our internal monologues of like how we're talking to ourselves and how we're talking to ourselves about the world that we live in. So like if we have more opportunities to interact with people that support us, that make us feel safe, maybe that internal monologue changes, maybe the way that we view the world changes, maybe how we feel, how safe we feel changes because of the people that are around us that show us very regularly that we are safe.
That we can trust other people. Yeah, exactly. Well, this has been so cool.
Yeah. I would say that the last bit that we could brainstorm this a little bit, is like, what are things that we could do now that kind of like bring us into this kind of utopia sense. And I had a couple of thoughts of like just things that we could do that start to create that village atmosphere again.
Okay.
And that's like going to the farmers market and interacting with your local makers, your local artists, your local producers. Like if they're making food, go talk to them, go find out who they are, and really get to know them and what they're doing in your community. Because then maybe you might be at like a restaurant or the grocery store and pass by them, and then you start to recognize people and feel like oh, I know you, I remember you from the market, right? I think that's a really fun way to start creating a village in this now and age, right? This new age, is to just kind of put yourself out there and see if you can start creating and forming relationships with your local people.
I think that's a great idea. And I think, I love your idea to just list a few actionable steps like that we could start implementing today if we want.
Yeah.
And I think another thing we could do that you brought up is start dropping in on our friends and start being okay with our friends dropping in on us.
Yeah.
And being okay with the house not being perfect, you not being perfect, the kids not being perfect.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay. And you can spend 20 minutes chatting with somebody who dropped by, even if it's just on the front porch or whatever. Just, I think, and even maybe you have a conversation with your friends or your acquaintances and say, hey, I'd love it if you just drop by anytime you want. And I'd love it if it's okay if I just drop by anytime.
Oh yeah.
Would you be okay with that? And I think most people would be like, yeah, dude, that sounds fine.
I think that's great. I think that's great too. Like, and putting that out there, like intentionally putting that out there to your friends and saying like, it's okay, you can do this. Yeah, another thing is like getting to know your neighbors. I know that's really hard for some people, especially because we've lived in our isolated single family homes. If that's where you live, or maybe you live in an apartment building but have never knocked on the neighbor's door. I think it's important to really get to know your neighbors. I know that I've made it a point to know all my neighbors' names, and we give them they give us gifts for like Halloween and Christmas, and it's just like a quick baked good or something, but it just kind of reinforces that we're there and helps to form that bond and that kind of responsibility to the neighbors. So my kids especially, I make them go and like bring cookies around so that they know who they are. So it's really helped us to really form a bond in our neighborhood. So I highly encourage that if your neighborhood is safe.
I couldn't agree more. I moved to a new neighborhood a couple of years ago, and it's a neighborhood I've wanted to live in for 20 years. Ever since I moved to Sacramento, I wanted to live in this neighborhood, and it's like Main Street, USA. And I knew that it was a tight-knit community, but it wasn't until I moved here that I realized how tight-knit it is. And we all know each other's names. We all have each other's phone numbers. Yep. We all give each other gifts at the holidays. We have parties. We have street parties.
Yeah.
We do. You will absolutely, if you go out and walk your dog, you will see somebody you know, and you will stop and talk every time. And there are times that you're like, oh God, I just want to walk the dog. But it is such a good feeling. And it's support. When I travel, if something goes wrong, if I want somebody to check on the house, there are 12 people that I can text and say, hey, can you help me out? And it is such a good feeling. I've always wanted to live in a neighborhood like this, and finally got it. So yes, if you can foster that kind of relationship, even with just a couple of your neighbors, it is so worth it.
It really is. Going back to the idea of safety, like once you get to know your people around you, you you look out for them. And so, you know, there was very specifically an incident where my neighbors across the street, one of their power lines actually broke. There was a branch that fell on it, broke, and it started a fire in their backyard. And my desk faces this way. There's a window right here, and I can see out, and I saw it happen, and I immediately was able to call 911. I ran over, knocked on their door, like ran in their house, made sure that they were safe, and like got them out. And so, like, you know, because I know, like, I don't want anything to happen to them because I know them, and I really care for them. So it's really like fostering that safety net, that kind of sense of safety too, for not just for them, but for me too, because I know that, you know, if anything were to happen to us, we could rely on them as well.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, everybody benefits. Are there any other actionable steps that you can think of?
I'm sure that there are. I would love to hear from anybody who's listening what their ideas would be to like start fostering that relationship, start creating a village now, so that we can start changing the tides for our generations to come.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Love to hear anyone's ideas on that. I think this was a really fun episode.
Mm-hmm.
Really good talk. I love thinking through the utopia, and I hope we live to see it in our lifetime. You know, I don't know if that will happen, but even if we just get a few steps closer, that would feel good.
All we can do is just start pushing the needle in that direction. And starting to talk about it is really important, because the more time that we spend isolated and kind of like focused inward, the less options we'll have, the less opportunities we'll have to really start pushing the needle, start moving towards a more supportive and fostering community.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me on. This was really fun.
Yeah, it was. We'll definitely do it again. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Call Her Daring podcast. You can find me and Call Her Daring on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Follow for even more content and conversations about women being radically honest about the female experience. Please join me here every week for a new episode of Call Her Daring, and let's continue the powerful tradition of storytelling with the goal of informing and educating us all, so that we may step into our truest selves and realize our full potential as powerful women.